Everyone, I'm Major Garrett coming to you from New York City. We start tonight with breaking news. One child and two adults have been critically injured. That's what authorities say after a Delta flight from Minneapolis flipped upside down at Toronto's Pearson Airport. As you can see, the runway is covered with snow, and there were wind gusts, crosswind gusts of up to 40 miles per hour at the time of this crash. 14 people in all, authorities tell us, were transported to area hospitals. I want to bring in commercial airline pilot Laura Einsetler. I hope that I've got that right, Laura, for your assessment of what we've seen. And as people look at these astonishing pictures of a commercial airliner upside down on a snowy runway, your initial thoughts?
We're in Toronto.
But the situation is very tragic, of course. The great part about this in the sense that the cabin is mostly intact, but we will have to determine exactly what it is that happened and why this happened.
And as you look at it, it is a tragic situation. The initial reports seem to be much more positive than our deepest fears would have reasonably led us to suspect, looking at a commercial airliner upside down. That has to be testament to the crew.
They're going to be looking at different factors that are involved in this, such as the gusty wind conditions. It is very challenging, especially in February, to be operating in and out of Toronto. The airport does an excellent job in maintaining typically clear runways for us as we're landing and taking off in and out of there. They're going to be looking at things like wind gusts, wind shear, possible wake turbulence situations, what the crew was experiencing, and take the details from there with the NTSB, the CAA, and the FAA.
And Laura, to my untrained eye, it is something that I'm assuming on approach, something happened with the wind that was of such significant turbulence that it turned the plane upside down. That's just my uneducated look at the video, wondering what might have happened. Does that seem like a plausible scenario to you?
It depends on the variables of the circumstances. So how strong were the wind gusts, the capabilities, of course, of the aircraft and the crew, their experience. Were there any larger jets possibly preceding this to kick off any wake turbulence in addition to gusty winds? What were the runway conditions, things of that nature.
And Laura, you have alluded to this, but I want to ask you for your expertise. What are the challenges on approach? Crosswinds, you mentioned wind shear. That's a term that some of our viewers might be familiar with, even though they're not experienced pilots or know a lot about avionics. What are some of the challenges on approach in the wintertime if there are heavy crosswinds?
Well, in the wintertime, things that we're obviously paying very close attention to, what the visibilities are, is there blowing snow, what type of snow, how it's affecting the aircraft itself, our actual systems of our aircraft, de-icing capabilities, the wind capabilities of the aircraft. If it's lower visibility type conditions, can we do an auto land, or is this a manual land? Those are things that we're looking at. Also, conditions of the runway itself. How icy is the runway? What are the friction coefficients of the runway? Our stopping capabilities in the various conditions.
Laura Einsetler, thank you very, very much for your time and your expertise. Stay with us. We have more news ahead. You are watching America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. See, I got a chance to sit down. I got a hot cup of coffee, and I'm told our communications are all reestablished, which is very good news, and I hope it's very much true. Nancy Cordes is with us. There she is. I hope she can hear me in West Palm Beach. There's a nod. That's an acknowledgement. She can hear me. Nancy, you talked to us before the break.
You look and sound terrific, Major.
Isn't that special? You talked to us about the FAA and the implications and concerns raised about the layoffs there. What about the IRS?
So at the IRS, there are two big stories. First of all, questions about layoffs at the IRS, how deep they go, what it could mean for tax season and the like. And then a parallel story about Doge trying to, or at least one representative of Doge, trying to gain access to a very specialized, antiquated computer system that contains a lot of sensitive data about U.S. taxpayers and concerns about what Doge might want to do with that system and with the information. Stephen Miller, one of President Trump's top aides, said in an interview today that all Doge wants to do is identify foreign fraud rings, modernize IRS systems, and restore the neutrality of the agency. But from speaking to officials at the IRS now or who have been at the IRS in the past, the concern is that because this system is so specialized, is somewhat antiquated, if any of these Doge representatives were to not just gain access to it, but rewrite code, they're worried about what that could mean for the upcoming filing system. Now, today, Elon Musk kind of laughed off the notion that he would do anything untoward with taxpayers' sensitive information. He said, hey, if I was going to do that, I would have done it back when I ran PayPal, the financial company, basically indicating that, he has no need for that information. He is, after all, the richest person in the world. But, this is a completely unique situation. A sensitive situation, because we've just never seen an outside company, outside agency like this try to come into a federal agency and dictate how its computer systems should operate or how its federal workforce should be allocated.
And Nancy, to your larger point from the talk we had before the break, it's impossible to measure for the general public or anyone from Congress who might be curious what's actually going on and how they're going about it. Because,
right,
as you said, the website is kind of this land of opacity where there's a statement here or a thread here, but no actual reporting that anyone can measure, hold up to the light and say this is or isn't.
Right. And there's also an assumption that they're far from done. So even if we were able to calculate how many hundreds of workers at the CDC or the NIH had been fired, there's an assumption that there are more people on the chopping block. And so the assumption is that there will be real life implications if you lay off workers at the Forest Service, or you lay off food inspectors, or if you lay off experts in communicable diseases. There will, you would assume, be some kind of downstream effect. But it is going to probably take getting downstream to know just how large, how significant those effects are.
A wide and turbulent stream indeed. Nancy Cordes, thank you so very much. Max Steyer joins us now. He's the founding president and CEO of the Partnership for Public Service. Max, you know a lot about this area of inquiry that we're going to launch here. What are your top-level concerns about Doge and the effect it's having across agencies with so many layoffs?
Well, look, I think Nancy Cordes did a very good job of describing some of the things that are going on and the risks that are involved here. I think if you take a step back, it's worth noting that the federal workforce today is the same size as it was in 1969. That's in absolute terms. And in relative terms, given the fact that our country has grown so much, it's a lot smaller. So the idea that you're going to take on the federal government size by reducing headcount, frankly, does not make a lot of sense. The way it's being done, as your reporter noted, is also not only not transparent, it's clearly being done without any strategy or thought. People are being fired because they are the most vulnerable, probationary employees who are there under a year and therefore have fewer protections. There is zero focus on people who are actually low performers or occupations that we might think we have too many inside the government. So it's clearly not being done in a way that is going to save the taxpayer anything. If anything, we're going to see huge costs, both in terms of lost services that will really matter, but also ultimately, even in things like activity that is plainly or clearly illegal in terms of the way these folks are being fired, is going to be civil servants who have to defend them, and it's going to be the American taxpayer that pays the damages. So all in all, this is a very troubling set of circumstances. As Nancy Cordes noted, it's not over yet, and we really do need a lot more accountability than we're getting right now.
Max, I want to pick up on 2 points you just made. One, this probationary status. As I understand it, some of the people who fall into this category might be longtime employees who were promoted to another position, and it's in that promotion status that they're probationary. But they may have a lot of experience or expertise or something that their particular agency relies upon.
No doubt that is correct. It's also true that you're talking about not just the FAA and the IRS, but I know of at least one specific example of a VA doctor who is probationary, who's been fired, nurses at the VA. I mean, it's across the board, and really important to underscore, there is no strategy here. And you really are seeing an example of break it, maybe to fix it, but certainly to break it. And there is no benefit to the American public to what is going on right now. Our government really does need to be reformed, but we're going in the wrong direction. Underlying this is the really core proposition that civil servants should be there in a nonpartisan basis. They should be experts who are selected not because they are loyal to an individual, but that they're loyal to the rule of law and to our Constitution. And that fundamental proposition that we've had for 140 years under Republican and Democratic presidents is being overturned in a dramatic and very destructive way.
And Max, is it legal?
I would say not. I mean, obviously, this is a whole mix of different activities that are taking place, but there does not seem to be any real understanding of what the legal requirements are. So I have no doubt that there are violations of the law that are taking place and real people getting hurt. So yes, the court system may have important role to play here, but in the meanwhile, the American public and civil servants are going to be hurt.
Max, real quickly, for those in the audience who would say, hey, wait a minute. As a candidate, Donald Trump said he was going to do this. He won the election. He's the head of the executive branch. As chief executive, he has authority over the executive branch. I want him to have what he wants. What would you say to
Right.
that?
And I would say this is not what Donald Trump ran on. Donald Trump did not say that he was going to fire the people who were merit-based career civil servants and replace them with loyalists. In fact, he denied that he was going to do things that Project 2025 said that they were going to do. He did not say he was going to violate the law. We are seeing things that I don't believe the American public bought into. We have polling that shows vast majority of Republican, Democrats, and independents want, in fact, a merit-based, nonpartisan civil service. This is not what they want. This is not what they should get, and it's going to be bad for all of us.
Max Steyer with the Partnership for Public Service. Thank you very much for your time, sir.
Thank you.
As a candidate, Donald Trump promised to cut prices. You know that whole inflation thing? Well, now as president, what has he done or trying to do to lower costs? Our political panel standing by in Washington to weigh in on that and many other momentous questions. That's next. You're watching America Decides. Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. We are following the latest developments out of Toronto, where at least 3 people, authorities tell us, including 1 child, are listed as currently critically injured after a plane landed upside down. You can see some of the video there from Toronto Pearson International Airport. Joining us now on the phone is CBS News producer Ahmed Mokhtar, who is at Toronto Pearson International Airport, where we are told at some point in the not too distant future, a press conference is expected. Is that true?
Hi, yes. We have been called to a building close to the airport, saying there is going to be a press conference. I just spoke with the lady inside. They said they are not, we still don't know who is going to lead the presser. Is it Delta? Is it the police? We don't know that information yet. When this is going to start, they still don't know that information. But all the journalists are here waiting to hear from the authorities.
Understood. What can you tell us about conditions at the airport presently?
At this moment, as I spoke with many passengers at the departure of the airport, they said that their flights have been canceled. We also got some notifications from the airport saying some of the flights have been canceled for today, for this evening.
And summarize for the audience what happened late this afternoon as this Delta plane came into the airport? I know we don't know all the things that happened, but the general actions as it relates to this crash.
Around 2:30, I think we got notifications that a Delta plane at the Pearson Airport had a landing crash. We saw the pictures. The plane was upside down. The authorities told us 18 people were on board this plane. And later they said 15 people have been hospitalized, including 3 in critical condition, a child, a woman in her 40s, and a male in her 60s. They have been hospitalized. Doug Ford, who is the premier of the Ontario, he said nobody was killed in this crash, and the authorities are working what caused the crash and how it happened. So we are still waiting for the answers.
Ahmed Mukhtar at the airport in Toronto Pearson International Airport, to be specific. Thank you very, very much. I want to bring in our political panel. Joel Payne, CBS News political contributor and Democratic strategist. Lauren Tomlinson is a Republican strategist and formerly worked for the Department of Homeland Security. So I'm not going to get you to talk about the politics of this, but in general, there have been several tragic aviation episodes in the last 3 weeks. And as people absorb the pursuit of efficiency that goes through the FAA and reduces workforce there, that might cause some manner of either concern or anxiety. Joel?
Yeah, and Major, obviously sending best wishes to all those who were on that plane, and hoping that, as Ahmed's report says, that all those folks are safe and are able to be returned home. I am leery of drawing any direct connection, right, to a lawmaker and to things like this. I think it's kind of slippery slope, and I don't think it's a good idea. However, I do think governance of things like air safety does fall under the purview of our president and of our leadership. And I do think that when you are Donald Trump and when you are going after with a hatchet some of these agencies, some of these safety protocols, and these folks who are in place to keep us safe, you do have to deal with the political fallout potentially of having some of these incidents that might happen that folks can draw a conclusion and a connection to. It is not always that the American public will do the work of giving people the benefit of the doubt when you have things like that happen. So I do think that Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and Republicans expose themselves to that type of critique when you have those incidents and those events that happen, and when you are taking the very haphazard, hatchet-like approach to going after safeguards that exist within our system for a reason.
Lauren, the clash, possibly, politics, governance. What are your thoughts?
I agree with Joel that I think it's too early to tie this to anything that a particular lawmaker or agency is doing at this moment. And I also agree that aviation safety has got to be, any type of safety from all the agencies has got to be top priority for this government. However, what Doge seeks to do as far as the Trump administration and the cuts that are going on within the government, I don't think the idea is that the dismantling of our safety systems. The idea is creating more efficiencies, and that can be done through technology. It can be done through consolidation of agencies so that the departments communicate better because they're in more appropriate agencies that make sense. There's no more duplicative work. There's lots of arguments to be made of this tightening of the federal government that in theory should add to our safety, not necessarily take it away.
And Lauren, let me drill down on that a bit, because I think a lot of Americans would agree with you. If you can find efficiencies, if you can improve communication. But I wonder about the transition period, going from one to another. If, in fact, more efficiency and better communication is on the other side of that, do you lose something if you move so rapidly? The idea, move fast, break things, move fast, fix things. I think most Americans, to Joel and yours point, would like to move fast if you can, but make sure along the way you fix things and something doesn't fall in between this transition zone.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, and I think a lot of that is going to end up happening. I think the move fast and break things is also a special employee nature. Elon Musk has 130 days that he's allowed to be a special government employee, so I think that is a part of this that people probably don't realize. But the other part of this is that, in order to break a system like this and really force the reorganization, it's something that our lawmakers have been trying to do for a very long time. Take the Department of Homeland Security. It has crazy oversight of multiple different committees ever since it was founded, and they've been trying to correct it for decades and have not been able to. So moving fast and break things might actually work in this system, but they're probably going to have to take a step back. The administration, just like Marco Rubio just had to do with USA Aid, they're going to have to work with Congress to actually do this. So I think the forcing mechanism is moving fast and breaking things. I think on the back end, they're going to have to work with Congress to actually implement this in a way that makes more sense.
Let Congress fix it. Oh, boy, that'll be fun to watch. So inflation, you remember that. It's a big part of the campaign, and the president was asked about that over the weekend. Let's listen to what he had to say.
This was caused by Biden. I had 4 years of virtually no inflation, so I'm just taking over. But I'll tell you what, this country has made more progress in the last 3 weeks than it's made in the last 4 years, and we're respected again.
So again, a familiar refrain. Biden is all the reason that there is inflation, even though it persists now, persisted last week. I know it's early, but Joel, what's your take on the inflation conversation?
Major, I've been virtually and at this desk with you many a time. And when Joe Biden was president, I said this then, and I'll say it now for Donald Trump. When you are the president, it is all your credit and it is all your fault, period. That's not just me as a political strategist. That's how the American people think about it. So you can try to get away with that for a few days. He might have a couple more weeks on a honeymoon with the American people. But pretty soon, people are going to wonder why their eggs cost $9, or why gas has not dropped, or why inflation has not magically gone away because he sprinkled magical MAGA fairy dust on it. And I don't think that the American people are going to take it's the last guy's fault for a long period of time. Whether or not they should is kind of separate and apart from the argument here, Major. It's just whether or not the American people will actually allow for that. They didn't allow Joe Biden to do it last time when Donald Trump was the person he was replacing, and they're not going to allow Donald Trump to do it now that he's replacing Joe Biden.
Lauren?
I love that phrase, MAGA fairy dust, because I think he is sprinkling it all over the place with these executive orders. Listen, I think what he was actually referring to is that the inflation data that came out, and this is going to be lost on, I think, the average American, did include the last few weeks of the Biden administration. So they are Biden.
That's why I said it's early. It's early.
Yeah, it's early. It's Biden numbers. So I think that he's got a little bit of grace there. But as we've seen throughout the history of political campaigns and presidencies, you really have 6 months to change people's mind and solidify your political arguments here before the midterms. You've got a 6-month honeymoon period. And so, to Joel's point, I think he really does have to focus on bringing these numbers down. Now, what Kevin Hassert has said multiple times, the National Economic Council in the White House, he says that through deregulation, focusing on cutting spending that was very elevated during the Biden administration and other mechanisms like that, they will be bringing inflation numbers down, that it's just going to take a little time. So that's where I'm curious if this MAGA fairy dust ends up working.
Really quickly.
Go ahead.
The reason why that dog might not hunt is because of this. So Donald Trump, a lot of people don't see that he's doing things that are focused on the economy. Here's what they see. Going after political enemies and retribution. They see him renaming bodies of water. They see him talking about taking over Canada. They do not see him focused on making the economy better for them. And again, we're less than a month from inauguration. So that's fine right now. That's not going to last forever.
Lauren, you get the last word.
I agree. It's not going to last forever. And they do need to spend time communicating about it.
Joel Payne and Lauren Tomlinson, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Mexico's president is threatening to sue Google over the Gulf of America name change. The tech giant made the name change last week for anyone using its Maps app in the United States. Mexico's leader, Claudia Sheinbaum, argues President Trump's order to rename it only applies to the part of the Gulf controlled by the United States. She says Google's change is, quote, incorrect, unquote. People in her country still see the body of water, and many other people, not just those who live in Mexico, as the Gulf of Mexico. The rumored rift as President Trump and Elon Musk claim the media is trying to drive them apart. They're such great friends. More on their joint interview and how it all landed and what we're seeing so far from the Department of Government Efficiency. That's next. You're watching America Decides. Welcome back. President Trump and Elon Musk are expected to discuss the new Department of Government Efficiency and some of the pretty serious issues hovering around it in their first joint interview. There's a clip that's been released. The president in it discusses that he believes media outlets, in his words, are seeking to drive a wedge between him and Musk. Let's listen.
Elon called me. He said, you know, they're trying to drive us apart. I said, absolutely. No, they said, we have breaking news. Donald Trump has ceded control of the presidency to Elon Musk. You know what I have learned, Elon? The people are smart. They get it.
Yeah, they do, actually.
They get it. They really see what's happening.
Panel, McKenna Kelly and Victoria Elliott are both with Wired. We have talked about Wired before. Wired is all over this entire story of Elon Musk, Doge, and what those who are associated with Elon Musk's work are doing. It's great to have you both here. McKenna, let me start with you. What is, from your reporting, the most important and sort of newest revelation about what Doge is doing and some of the issues, controversies surrounding it?
Sure. Well, I think the most important thing to know right now is that we don't know a lot.
To Nancy's point earlier, there's just not this promised transparency is in name only, it seems.
Yes, and they've launched these Twitter accounts, X accounts, I should say. I'm still so bad at saying that. X accounts for every agency, asking people to, they're essentially crowdsourcing tips for fraud, waste, and abuse. And now I don't know what people outside, civilians, know about what's going on inside these agencies, but it sounds like transparency to Elon means using X.
Right. What is satisfactory to him, Victoria, but may not be satisfactory to Congress or the unions representing these civil servants, or maybe even some aspects of the public at large.
Right, and I think even coming down to what we're defining as waste, fraud, and abuse.
Right, that's great.
You know, technically, is USAID an agency established by Congress, funded by Congress? You know, that is something that the representatives of the American people and presidents year after year have decided is a priority. And while that might be a change in policy that the Trump administration and its allies in Congress want to put forth, the reality is it doesn't become wasteful just because Musk decides that, but that is how they're treating whole swaths of the federal government.
Right, and this definition really matters because let's say you're a recently promoted federal employee on probationary status. You might have been with your agency 5, 6, 7 years, climb the ladder and have a level of proficiency that's kind of important. But if you're probationary, suddenly you're wasteful and you can be lopped off because you have fewer protections, civil service and otherwise. That's, ladies and gentlemen, why Doge is zeroing in on probationary status employees. McKenna, that's my understanding of this.
Sure, they're easier, I guess, they see, to cut off. I think the important thing that you noted, though, about why these systems, right, why this is, there are these people, these probationary employees, they have so much institutional knowledge. Like you said, they could be there for several years at a time. And I think a very clear example of how important these people are is what we're seeing with the IRS today and yesterday, and how the IRS systems and Treasury systems are written in archaic coding languages that even if people like Luke Ferrator, these other Doge kid engineers, or even if they are the wunderkind that Elon makes them out to be.
And reasonably look at it and say, well, this is antiquated. Maybe we can do it better. That's a legitimate question.
Right.
But can't we see how you're doing it maybe or learn a little bit more about your procedures?
Exactly. And even these languages that they're hoping, you know, that the way that these systems are set up, they don't teach these languages in school very much anymore, especially COBOL and other languages like that.
And Victoria, the other question, it seems, hanging over all this is if you, and I know this is a lionized Silicon Valley term, phrase, run fast, break things. If in the breaking, things fall through the cracks and people are harmed or people's expectations are not met, there's a feedback loop in American politics. Things come back. They don't go away.
I mean, we would hope so, but I think the thing that's concerning right now is the feedback loop is through election cycles, it's through Congress, it's through the systems of checks and balances. And the reality right now is that Congress, really more than any entity, has the right to be pushing back and asking questions, has the right to be, you know, trying to maintain its own power by saying you don't get to just defund agencies or decide they don't exist when we've established them. And they don't seem particularly eager to do that
On the
right
Republican
now.
side, that's for sure.
And so I think that's a particularly concerning thing. And then, to McKenna's point on some of these archaic coding languages and systems that are set up, to someone from the Silicon Valley, where you're really looking at like efficiency, speed, that may seem really, really, really inefficient, but some of those inefficiencies are actually really important for security reasons. You don't necessarily want data being shared across every single agency, because that means if you hack one, if one has a security breach, then you're looking at the whole US government. There's a reason that sometimes systems feel archaic or clunky, and that's because they run very differently than a company.
And McKenna, how much of this flows through Elon Musk's not only intellectual fascination with, but actual profit orientation towards artificial intelligence?
Yeah, that's another thing. It's incredibly opaque what they're trying to do with artificial intelligence.
We don't even know.
We don't even know, right? But what we do know is that in agencies like the General Services Administration, which acts somewhat like the U.S. government's landlord, and then also has
owns tons of property all over the country.
Exactly, acts as landlord, but then also has a little tech group too. And the way that the director of that group, the Transformational Technology Services, normally kind of like a little silly group that nobody pays attention to, what he said is that the GSA and TTS, they want to turn these agencies into AI-first agencies. They want to be able to automate tasks. They want to be able to centralize all data across government into one place. And we don't really know how they plan to do that yet, but that seems to be the stated goal.
And who's the AI contractor? I wonder. Geez, could it be someone that Elon might know?
Well,
Victoria? I'm saying that slightly in jest.
Well, I mean, I think
it's one of the questions that hovers over this.
Yeah, I think that's a really valid point. And, there are already people in Elon's orbit who have close ties via contracts with the federal government. For instance, Palantir, which is chaired by Peter Thiel, his close ally, longtime Trump supporter, has billions of dollars of contracts with a bunch of government agencies. Elon himself has contracts with government agencies. So I don't think it would be unreasonable to ask, what sort of privatized entity might be looking to scoop that up.
Speaking of scooping things up, these two and Wired scoop a lot of things up in this space. Pay attention to them. McKenna Kelly, Victoria Elliott, thank you very
so
much.
Yeah, thank
Great
you.
to have you here.
We have 30,000 beds in Guantanamo to detain the worst criminal illegal aliens threatening the American people.
That was President Trump in January. Fast forward to today. Now even non-violent migrants are being sent to Guantanamo Bay. We take a closer look at that and the revelations around that next. You're watching America Decides. Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. The Trump administration is holding more than 150 migrant detainees at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. A dozen military flights carrying migrants have landed there since President Trump's return to office. Both high-threat and low-risk detainees are now in an immigration detention center at the U.S. Naval Base there. Camilo Montoya Galvez joins us now. Camilo, talk to us about what Guantanamo has become.
Sure.
And what is the difference in the treatment of these undocumented migrants and those who were there long-standing?
Critical questions, Major. President Trump instructed officials to essentially dramatically expand migrant holding capacity at the U.S. Naval Base in Guantanamo Bay. Historically, under Republican and Democratic presidents alike, the U.S. has detained some migrants there, but these have been asylum seekers intercepted at sea, like Haitian and Cuban refugees who are undergoing screenings by U.S. asylum officers to be resettled in third countries like Australia or Canada, not people arrested in the interior of the country and then sent to Cuba. Now, that is what is happening as we speak. The U.S. has sent about a dozen military flights to Guantanamo Bay with about 150 migrant detainees. And despite what the president has said and what officials like Kristi Noem, the Homeland Security Secretary, have said, the people being sent there are not only criminals and alleged gang members, but they also include migrants who are in the country illegally, but who lack any serious criminal record or any at all. And that undermines the administration's messaging that this base will only house the worst of the worst. That's right. Major. And so all these men, we are told, are from Venezuela, and they are going to be detained there until they can be deported to Venezuela. And that is the key question, because, as you know, the government in Venezuela has rejected U.S. deportation flights for years, including under the Biden administration. So these folks could be detained there indefinitely.
What is the capacity, if it is knowable, at Guantanamo? How many more people could go there?
We don't know, but the objective by President Trump is to have sufficient detention capacity to hold as many as 30,000 people at Guantanamo Bay. That would be the largest immigration detention center created by the U.S.
Wow.
It's a lot of people.
Department of Homeland Security firings via Doge. What's the news there?
So the Department of Homeland Security over the weekend fired more than 400 of its employees, mainly at non-immigration related agencies like the cybersecurity branch at DHS and FEMA, which of course is, responds to disasters. But 50% of the cuts affected employees at U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. This is the agency that administers the legal immigration system. They adjudicate requests for asylum, work permits, green cards, and U.S. citizenship. Those employees have been terminated. And we also know that the Justice Department separately has fired more than a dozen immigration judges. These are the judges who adjudicate the claims of people who are facing deportation. And it is really important to note that this comes as the immigration court system is still facing a backlog of more than 4 million pending cases. That is a historic backlog, and that could inhibit the administration in carrying out those promised mass deportations, because even if you arrest someone, Major, you still, under U.S. law, have to give that person a chance to make their case in front of a judge. And now they have fewer judges to adjudicate those claims.
And I want to talk about this a little bit more, Camilo, because I want the audience to sit with this for a second. I've covered immigration a long time, not nearly as well as you do, but for a long time. And everyone associated with this issue and the question of reform, Republican and Democrat, hard right, hard left, has said, one of the things we need to do, one of the few things they absolutely agree on, is have more of these immigration judges to handle these cases faster, to bring down that caseload that is piling up, and get some sense and sensibility to this. And what you just said is several of them were just fired.
That's right. It has been a long-standing bipartisan consensus because judges allow the government to deport people much more quickly, because they can hear those cases. And as you know, many of the migrants who are facing deportation ultimately will not qualify for asylum because the legal threshold is very high to qualify for humanitarian protection. But again, they need to go through the process first. And now there are fewer people in government to adjudicate those claims.
And back to the DHS firings, if I understand you correctly, so those who are at the door that might let you in are being fired.
That's right.
Those who are on the hunt for those who are here without documentation to be deported are not being affected.
That's right. But I should underscore that the two large DHS agencies overseeing the president's sweeping crackdown on illegal immigration, Customs and Border Protection, and Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, have been spared so far. So we'll see if that continues.
One last thing before we go. We've got about a minute. I keep reading headlines about the numbers of those swept up in various enforcement actions not meeting the numbers that President Trump has in mind, or the bad actors that he said were there to be found.
The problem is that this administration is now encountering the same logistical, legal, and diplomatic challenges that every single administration, Republican and Democrat, has faced on this issue. And that is that the U.S. simply does not have the immigration detention capacity, the judges, the ICE officers, the Border Patrol agents, and the officials necessary to find, detain, and adjudicate the claims of everyone who is here illegally.
And maybe there are not as many bad actors as the president's rhetoric would have suggested.
ICE has a backlog of 8 million people. Only about 600,000 of them have some criminal record.
Camilo Montoya Galvez, thank you very much. That does it for today. We'll be back with another edition of America Decides from New York tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report, well, that starts right now.